The massive white ships came down from the sky like falling stars, their hulls gleaming in the morning sun.
Ambassador Velthak
Pressed his long fingers against the viewing port and watched Earth grow larger below him. For 6 months, he had studied the humans through their primitive broadcasts. He knew their languages, their customs, their simple ways of greeting each other. This would be easy. The Galactic Council had done this 1,000 times before. It would land, make contact with the local leaders, and offer the gift of advanced civilization. Most species were grateful. They wanted the medicine that could cure any disease, technology that could feed billions, the knowledge that could take them to the stars. In return, they would join the council and follow its rules. It was a fair trade. Velthak had prepared his speech carefully. He would tell the humans about the wonders waiting for them among the stars. He would explain how they could leave behind war and hunger and fear. All they had to do was accept the council's guidance and become part of something greater than themselves. The first sign something was wrong came when they tried to contact Earth's governments. The communication channels were open, but nobody answered. The second sign was the silence from the cities below. From space, Earth's major population centers should have been buzzing with activity. Instead, they looked strangely quiet. Perhaps they are afraid, suggested Commander Thexra, Velthak's second in command. Primitive species often hide when they see our ships for the first time. Velthak nodded. That made sense. Humans had never seen technology like theirs. Of course they would be frightened. The council would need to approach this carefully. Show them there was nothing to fear. The landing party descended to New York City first. The massive metropolis stretched out before them, its tall buildings reaching toward the sky like metal trees. But as their shuttle touched down in the empty streets, Velthak felt a chill run through his long body. The city was completely deserted. They walked through Times Square, their footsteps echoing off the silent buildings. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of streets. Storefronts were dark. Even the famous electronic billboards had gone black. It was as if millions of people had simply vanished into thin air. "Sir," called out Scout Nixon from across the square. "You need to see this." Velthak hurried over to where the scout was examining a military checkpoint. The barriers were still in place, but the guards were gone. More unsettling were the signs posted everywhere in multiple languages. Evacuation complete, Protocol 7, active nitrogen mass side, civilian personnel, authorized beyond this point. "They knew we were coming," Velthak whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Somehow the humans had detected their approach and evacuated their cities. But how? The Council's ships used the most advanced stealth technology in the galaxy. No primitive species should have been able to spot them until they were already in orbit. The landing party spread out across the city, searching for clues. What they found made less and less sense. The humans hadn't fled in panic. This had been an organized, planned evacuation. They had taken only what they needed and left everything else behind. It was as if they had been preparing for this moment for years. In the abandoned Pentagon, they found the first real evidence of what the humans had been doing. The building was empty, but its computers were still running. When the Council's technicians broke through the security systems, they discovered files that made Velthak's blood run cold. The humans had been watching them. For decades, they had been intercepting Council transmissions, learning Council languages, studying Council technology. They knew about every species the Council had integrated. They knew about the pattern of contact, negotiation, and absorption that had brought 1,000 worlds under Council control. But more than that, they had been preparing. In hidden facilities across the planet, the humans had been building weapons. Not the crude projectile throwers Velthak had seen in their entertainment broadcasts, but sophisticated energy weapons based on reverse-engineered Council technology. They had fighter craft that could operate in space, powered by fusion reactors. That shouldn't have been possible for a species that had barely reached their own moon. How is this possible? Commander Vexra stared at the technical specifications scrolling across the screen. They should be centuries away from this level of development. Velthak didn't answer. He was reading something else, something that made his hands shake. It was a document titled First Contact Scenarios, and it contained detailed plans for exactly this situation. The humans had wargamed every possible approach the Council might take. They had prepared responses for diplomatic contact, military occupation, even orbital bombardment. But most disturbing of all was the final section, Hunter Protocol. Guest translation software struggled with some of the concepts, but the meaning was clear enough. The humans weren't planning to hide or surrender or negotiate. They were planning to hunt. As if summoned by his thoughts, alarms began blaring throughout the abandoned city. The Council's ships in orbit were reporting contact with unknown vessels, small, fast craft that had appeared from nowhere and were moving with impossible speed. Velthak looked up at the sky and realized, with growing horror, that they weren't the hunters in this scenario. They were the prey. 2 miles beneath the frozen peaks of the Himalayas, General Kim Soo sat in a room. That didn't exist on any map. The walls were lined with screens showing every movement of the alien ships above. His weathered hands moved across the control panel as he watched the Council forces spread out across the empty cities, searching for signs of human life they would never find. Kim Soo had gray hair now, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. He had spent 30 years preparing for this day. Ever since the night his team first intercepted strange signals from deep space, most people would have dismissed them as cosmic noise, but Kim Soo had been a soldier long enough to recognize the patterns of military communication. The signals had come from something called the Galactic Council. At first, the messages seemed peaceful enough. Talk of friendship, shared knowledge, and joining a great community among the stars. But as Kim Soo's team decoded more transmissions, they began to understand the truth behind the friendly words. The Council had a simple method. It would arrive at a new world with gifts and promises. They would offer medicine, technology, and protection from the dangers of space. In return, they wanted only cooperation and acceptance of Council authority. Most species said yes, grateful for the help, and eager to join the galactic community. But the species that said no simply disappeared from the records. Their worlds went silent. Their civilizations vanished without explanation. Councils. Files spoke of integration difficulties and necessary adjustments. But the pattern was clear to anyone who looked closely enough. Kim Soo had looked very closely indeed. "Sir," said Lieutenant Parkman, her voice coming through the secure communication system. "The alien search teams are moving into Sector 7. They're using some kind of scanning device." Kim Soo nodded, watching the thermal displays on his screens. The Council soldiers moved in perfect formation, their energy weapons ready, their sensors sweeping back and forth across the empty streets. They were professional, disciplined, and completely unaware that human eyes were watching their every move. "Let them scan," Kim Soo said quietly. "They won't find anything we don't want them to find." The humans had learned many things in their 30 years of preparation. They had learned that the Council species came from worlds where predators had been extinct for millions of years. They had learned that these aliens had never faced the enemy that could hide, adapt, and strike from the shadows. They had learned that the Council's greatest weakness was their inability to imagine a species that might choose to fight rather than submit. But most importantly, they had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to think like predators in a galaxy full of prey. Status report from the mountain teams. Parkman continued. "All observation posts are active. We have eyes on every Council ship, every landing party, every communication relay. They can't move without us knowing about it." Kim Soo smiled grimly. The Council soldiers were good at following orders and maintaining formations, but they had no idea how to fight an enemy they couldn't see. Humanity, on the other hand, had evolved as hunters. Their ancestors had tracked mammoth across frozen, plains-stalked deer through dense forests, and survived ice ages that had killed countless other species. The Council thought they were dealing with a primitive civilization that had barely reached its own moon. They had no idea that human observers had been watching their ships for weeks, cataloging their weapons, studying their tactics, and identifying their leaders. They didn't know that every piece of Council technology that had fallen into human hands over the years had been reverse-engineered and improved upon. On the main display, Kim Soo watched as a council search team entered what had once been a shopping mall. The aliens moved carefully, their weapons raised, their sensors active. They were looking for humans, but they were looking in all the wrong places. "Ghost Team 7, you are clear to move," Kim Soo said into his microphone, 3 miles away. When hidden in the shadows of the mall's upper level, Sergeant Lee Ho received the message. He and his team had been watching the aliens for 20 minutes, studying their movements, learning their patterns. Now it was time to demonstrate that humans could be very good at being invisible when they wanted to be. Lee Ho moved like smoke through the darkened corridors, his team following behind him. They had practiced this 1,000 times in training. Simulations. Approach from the blind spots. Avoid the sensor sweeps. Get close enough to plant the tracking devices. And disappear before the aliens even knew they had been there. The council soldiers never saw them coming. One moment they were alone in the empty mall. The next moment they were walking past humans who were close enough to touch them. But the humans remained shadows, ghosts in the darkness, leaving only tiny electronic markers that would let Kim Soo track every alien movement for the next phase of the plan. "Tracking devices in place," Lee Ho reported. Moving to secondary position, Kim Soo nodded, watching as his teams across the globe reported similar successes. The council thought. They were hunting humans, but they were wrong. The humans were hunting them, and they were very good at it. The real war was about to begin. Captain Lee Jin pressed himself flat against the metal wall of the ventilation shaft, listening to the alien footsteps pass below. The council's command ship was massive, stretching for miles in every direction. But Lee Jin had been crawling through its hidden spaces for 3 weeks now. He knew every corridor, every room, every security checkpoint. The aliens had no idea he was there. Lee Jin was small and quick, built like a marathon runner rather than a soldier. But that was exactly what made him perfect for this job. The Council's forces searched the empty cities of Earth, looking for humans who had vanished like smoke. Lee Jin and his team had been doing something much more dangerous. They had been getting inside the enemy's most secure locations. "To report," Lee Jin whispered into his tiny radio, his voice barely louder than breathing. "Kitchen level, Section 4, came the reply from Corporal Park Yoon. The night shift just started. Guards are rotating every 2 hours, just like yesterday." Lee Jin nodded to himself. For weeks his team had been watching the aliens daily. Routines, learning their schedules, mapping their habits. The council species were creatures of order and discipline. They did everything at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way, every single day. It made them predictable, and predictable enemies were easy to hunt. Alpha 3 status. Engineering deck reported Sergeant Kim Bora. "I've got eyes on their main power systems. These aliens really don't like surprises, do they?" Lee Jin had to agree. The Council's technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also incredibly fragile. Their ships were built for exploring peaceful space, not for fighting wars. Every system had multiple backups, but all the backups were connected to the same central network. If something went wrong with one part, the whole ship could be crippled. The humans had learned this by watching, by waiting, by being patient hunters who studied their prey before striking. It was a lesson their ancestors had learned millions of years ago on the African plains. And it still worked among the stars. Lee Jin reached a junction in the ventilation system and paused to check his map. The ship's layout was burned into his memory now, but he still liked to be careful. Below him, he could hear the soft hum of alien conversation as a patrol passed through the corridor. They were speaking in their own language, but Lee Jin had learned enough to understand the basics. They were complaining about the boring assignment. Nothing ever happened on these integration missions, they said. The primitive species always surrendered quickly once they saw the Council's superior technology. Soon, they would be heading home with another successful conquest to add to their records. Lee Jin smiled grimly. The aliens had no idea what was coming. Alpha 4. "You're clear to move," he whispered into his radio. Private Song Minho was the youngest member of the team, barely 21 years old, but he moved through the ship's computer systems like a ghost. While the Council's technicians slept, Minho was copying their files, learning their secrets, and planting tiny programs that would activate when the time was right. The aliens thought their computer networks were secure, but they had never faced human hackers before. Humans had grown up with computers that tried to fight back, with systems that had been designed by people who expected other people to try to break them. The Council's computers were like houses with no locks, built by people who had never met. A thief. Package delivered, Minho reported. Their navigation system is going to have some very interesting problems when they try to leave. Li Jin continued moving through the ventilation shafts, heading toward his next objective. The Council's command center was just ahead, where their leaders made the decisions that controlled fleets of ships across the galaxy. For the past week, he had been watching and listening, learning who was important and who was just following orders that the aliens had grown soft over their long years of peace. They had forgotten what it meant to be hunted, to be afraid, to face an enemy that could strike from the shadows without warning. Their security was designed to keep out other civilized species who would announce themselves and follow the rules of warfare. But humans didn't follow those rules. Humans were the species that had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, that had fought their way to the top of the food chain on a world full of predators. They were the species that had learned to hunt in packs, to use tools, to think 3 steps ahead of their prey. As Li Jin reached the command center's outer wall, he could hear the alien officers inside discussing their plans. They were confident, relaxed, completely unaware that death was listening to every word they spoke. They talked about integrating Earth's population, about harvesting the planet's resources, about adding humanity to their collection of conquered species. Li Jin checked his watch. In exactly 17 minutes, teams like his would strike simultaneously across the entire Council fleet. The aliens would learn that they had made a terrible mistake when they chose to hunt humanity. They had forgotten that on Earth, the things that went bump in the night were usually coming to eat you. Ambassador Velthak stood in his private chambers, staring at the empty doorway where his personal bodyguards should have been standing. Crixon and Tolvix had been with him for 5 years, loyal soldiers who never left their posts. But when he had awakened this morning, they were simply gone. Computer, locate guards Crixon and Tolvix, he said to the room's artificial intelligence. Unable to locate specified personnel, the computer replied in its calm, mechanical voice. No record of departure or movement. Velthak felt a chill run through his long body. People didn't just vanish on Council ships. Vessels were sealed environments with sensors that tracked every living being aboard. Yet somehow, 2 trained soldiers had disappeared without leaving any trace. His communication device buzzed with an incoming message. Commander Vexra's face appeared on the screen, but something was wrong. The normally confident officer looked worried, almost frightened. Ambassador, we have a problem, Vexra said, without his usual formal greeting. I've lost contact with 3 of my section chiefs. They were conducting routine patrols, and then ... nothing. No emergency signals, no reports, nothing. Velthak's hearts began beating faster. How many others? 7 ships have reported similar incidents. Personnel are disappearing from their posts. Our sensors show no signs of intruders, no weapons fire, no struggle, they're just gone. Before Velthak could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The lights switched from their normal soft blue to harsh red, and the computer's voice filled the corridors alert. Unknown vessels detected. All personnel to combat stations. 8. Rushed to the command center, his feet slipping on the smooth metal floors. The main viewing screen showed the space around Earth, but something was very wrong with the picture. Where before there had been only empty space and distant stars, now there were ships. Dozens of them appearing from behind asteroids and debris. Fields like ghosts materializing from the darkness. Where did they come from? Velthak demanded. They were hiding, replied the ship's sensor officer, her voice shaking. They've been there all along, waiting. Our scanners never detected them because they were using the asteroid field as cover. The human ships were unlike anything in the Council's databases. They were angular and dark, built for speed and stealth rather than the elegant curves of Council vessels. No decorative panels, no ceremonial markings, no diplomatic symbols. These ships had been designed for only one purpose: War. Incoming transmission on all frequencies, the communications officer reported. A human face appeared on the main screen. It was a woman with short black hair and cold, calculating eyes. Her uniform was military, practical, with no ornaments or symbols of rank, except for simple metal bars on her collar. "Council vessels," she said, her voice carrying easily across the void between ships. "This is Admiral Parkna of the Earth's Defense Force. You wanted to meet humanity's representatives? Allow us to introduce ourselves." Velthok stepped forward, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure. "Admiral Parkna, I am Ambassador Velthek of the Galactic Council. We come in peace, seeking only to establish friendly relations between our peoples." Admiral Parkna's expression didn't change. "We know exactly why you're here, Ambassador. We've been listening to your communications for 30 years. We know about the integration protocol. We know about the species that refused your offer and mysteriously disappeared. We know what happens to worlds that don't want to join your council. I assure you, there has been some misunderstanding," Velthok began, but the Admiral cut him off. "The only misunderstanding is yours. You came here expecting to find another primitive species that would be grateful for your protection. Instead, you found predators who have been watching you, learning about you, and preparing for you." The tactical display Velthok could see the human ships moving into position around the Council fleet. They moved with precision and purpose, like a pack of wolves surrounding a herd of prey. The Council ships were larger and more heavily armed, but they were designed for exploration and peaceful contact. The human vessels were built for hunting. "You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender," Admiral Parkna continued. "Any attempt to flee or fight will be considered an act of aggression." "This is impossible, Commander," Dextra whispered. "How could a primitive species threaten the Council fleet?" Velthok was beginning to understand. Humans weren't primitive at all. They had been pretending, hiding their true capabilities while they studied their future enemies. Every piece of Council technology that had ever fallen into human hands had been reverse-engineered and improved upon. Every Council transmission had been decoded and analyzed. Admiral Velthok said carefully, "Surely we can negotiate. The Council has much to offer your people." "We've seen what you offer," Parkna replied. "Slavery dressed up as friendship, conquest disguised as protection. Mistake when you chose to hunt humanity." Human ships moved closer, their weapons powering up with an ominous hum that could be felt through the hulls of the Council vessels. "You forgot that we're the species that survive by being better predators than anything else on our world. And now, you're going to learn why Earth's children climb to the top of the food chain." The great Council chambers had been built to impress. Golden walls stretched up toward a crystal dome that showed the stars beyond, and hundreds of seats, arranged in perfect circles around a central speaking platform. For 1,000 years, this room had been where new species came to kneel before the Council and accept their place in the galactic order. Today, everything was different. Ambassador Velthok sat in chains, made of his own ship's metal, watching. As human soldiers escorted the Council members to their seats, the aliens who had once ruled half the galaxy now moved like frightened children, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Many of them had never seen violence before, had never faced an enemy that fought back. General Kim Soo walked slowly to the center of the chamber, his boots clicking on the polished floor. He was an old man now, his hair completely gray, but his back was straight and his eyes burned with the intensity of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Behind him stood a dozen human officers, their faces calm and professional. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," Kim Soo began, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "Welcome to your new reality," he turned slowly, looking at each group of aliens in turn, the proud Altarians with their long necks and golden skin, the insect-like Zephyrians who had controlled trade routes for centuries, the crystalline Vortons who had believed themselves too advanced to be threatened by any primitive species. "For 30 years we watched you," Kim Soo continued. "We listened to your communications, studied your history, learned your weaknesses. We know about the Kethmori who refused to join your council and were wiped out by a plague that appeared from nowhere. We know about the Drillahan who tried to fight and found their homeworld sun going nova. We know about the Yextai who..." simply vanished from all records after they said no to your generous offer. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were old secrets, things that had been hidden in classified files for centuries. You call it integration, Kim Soo said, his voice growing colder. You call it bringing civilization to the galaxy, but we know what it really is. You're parasites. You find species that are strong enough to be useful, but weak enough to be controlled, and you feed on them until there's nothing left. Admiral Parkness stepped forward, carrying a datapad that glowed with alien symbols. We've been through your records, all of them. 734 species have joined the Council in the past millennium. Of those, only 53 still exist as independent cultures. The rest have been absorbed, their people scattered across Council worlds as workers and servants. Truth hit the chamber like a physical blow. Many of the Council members had never seen these statistics before. They had been told that integration was voluntary, that species thrived under Council protection. They had never been shown the full picture of what their government really did. But you made a mistake when you came to Earth, Kim Soo said, walking closer to the assembled aliens. You assumed we were like the others. You thought we would be grateful for your protection, eager to trade our freedom for your technology. Stopped in front of Ambassador Velthok, looking down at the alien who had come to Earth expecting to find another easy conquest. You forgot that humans are predators. We evolved on a world where everything wanted to eat us, where only the strongest and smartest survived. We learned to hunt in packs, to use tools, to think like our prey. And for the past 30 years, we've been thinking like you. Kim Soo gestured to the human officers around him. Every one of these people is a specialist. They know your technology better than you do, because they've spent their lives studying it and improving it. They know your weaknesses because they've watched you for decades. They know your battle tactics because they've analyzed every conflict you've ever fought. The general moved to the center of the chamber, addressing the entire assembly. The age of the Council is over. You will not be conquering any more worlds. You will not be integrating any more species. Your fleets are disabled, your homeworlds are under human protection, and your government exists only because we allow it. A Zephyrian Council member, its insect-like mandibles, clicking nervously, raised one of its forearms. What? ... What do you want from us? Kim Soo smiled, but it was not a kind expression. We want you to remember what you've forgotten. We want you to remember that diplomacy only works when both sides have a choice. I want you to remember that some species bite back when you try to put them in cages. He turned to address the entire chamber one final time. From now on, the galaxy has new rules. Species will be free to choose their own path. Trade will be fair and voluntary. And anyone who tries to build another empire by swallowing weaker worlds will find out what happens. When you hunt the hunters, outside the chamber, human ships patrolled the space lanes, carrying a simple message to every world in the galaxy. Humanity had arrived, and they weren't asking for permission. The age of gentle tyranny was over, and something much more dangerous had taken its place. The predators had come to stay,